A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. I, Dr. Pallavi Saxena, on behalf of iLEAPS, welcomes you all. And Samina, project administrator, we both have started this iLEAPS Global Colloquium series. And the prime purpose of this Colloquium series is to introduce the scientific society and people with the distinguished and significant work of eminent scientists all over the world. It is a bright opportunity, especially for the ECRs, that is the early career researchers, to interact with the distinguished speakers and establish the bridge between the ideas and the knowledge through this platform. So just a short introduction about iLEAPS. iLEAPS is Land and Atmosphere Interactions, and it is a global research project of future Earth. And it provides understanding of how interacting physical, chemical, and biological processes transport and transform energy and matter through the land-atmosphere interface. So today we have our speaker with us, Professor Gerhard Lammel, Senior Scientist and Group Leader, Max Planck Institute for Chemistry, Mainz, Germany. He is a full professor of environmental chemistry at the Faculty of Sciences of Maastricht University, Brno, Czech Republic, and a senior scientist and research group leader at MPIC, Germany. He has been focusing on tropospheric and aerosol chemistry through field and laboratory experimental studies and multi-compartmental chemistry through modeling and field studies. He authored 140 plus papers in peer-reviewed journals, which got cited 4,500 plus times. And he acted as research scientist at KRC, Germany, the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, US, the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry, or University of Hamburg. He has been teaching at various universities in Germany and the Czech Republic, serves in various committees, and is an editor of the journal ESPR. He was also the chair of the board of German Chemical Society, Environmental Chemistry and Eco-Toxicology Division, and is member of the European Chemical Society's Division of Chemistry and the Environment. So today he will be delivering lecture on air-soil exchange of long-lived pollutants under the influence of southwest monsoon. So basically, he will talk about the PCBs, that is persistent organic pollutants and polychlorinated biphenyls, and their atmospheric transport and the modeling part, and how covering the area of the southwest monsoon, how it's had the influence on them. So I am very happy to invite Professor Lammel to deliver his lecture. Professor Lammel, over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me? Thank you very much, Pallavi, for this very nice introduction. I'm not sure whether my screen is shared now.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah. Now it's red again.
Is it visible?
Super. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for this nice invitation to talk to in the frame of iLEAPS. When I got this invitation, I thought land ecosystem and atmospheric processes, the best what would fit here could be our studies on air-soil exchange and air-sea exchange. The reason why we are doing this is we want to understand the chemodynamics of persistent substances in the Earth system. These are substances which are a concern because many of them are actually bioaccumulative not only in the ocean, as indicated here in the sketch, but also on land. And so we are exposed via our food basket, but also through like ingestion, dermal contact, and inhalation. We are exposed to these substances which reach, say, relevant concentrations in the along the food chains. For a chemist, for an environmental chemist, the most interesting aspect of this is that these substances are cycling in the Earth system on large scales. So they undergo various steps through the atmosphere by volatilization and subsequent deposition. And these processes actually lead to migration of the whole distribution. Please keep in mind that upon deposition, they are not necessarily degraded. They are usually degraded very slowly. Some of them might degrade never in seawater, for instance, or in soil. It has been stressed, therefore, that the accumulation of toxic substances in the Arctic, even observed decades after the ban of these substances, has to do with these processes where these substances are volatilized again, revolatilized again, and we have been studying this by large-scale modeling in the past. I show you here a very first example of the observation of accumulation of these substances far from the emissions, namely a shipborne experiment from the 1980s from a Japanese research vessel. And when these scientists went southward towards Antarctica, the concentrations in air and in surface waters did decrease, but by far not as much as you would expect regarding the fact that the vessel was going in very, very clean atmosphere over very, very clean waters. So was the perception by that time. But in fact, here, this is the study of pesticides which have been applied to the agriculture globally since 2 decades or so by that time. This is DDT and this is hexachlorocyclohexane, the 2 major insecticides of that period. These substances apparently have persisted there and have accumulated to some minor extent. I would like to bring that in context with carbon dioxide, which is the main species I understand iLEAPS is concerned of. Carbon dioxide, at least the carbon in it, is a multi-compartmental substance, and we are talking about fluxes in units of gigatons or petagrams, right? The substance is completely converted in the ocean, namely into carbonate, or in the biosphere, namely into hydrocarbons, right? And similar organic contaminants, but then like 9 orders of magnitude lower in their mass, are cycling between the compartments. And the conversion in the compartments is very slow, though. So very often it might be even 0. If it's not 0, then because of degradation, then still some of the substance might reside there and be bound to the matrix. That also happens. But usually the degradation is so slow that what comes back to the air is chemically not converted. We are talking here about byproducts from fossil fuel burning, like the dioxins and the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. We are talking about industrial chemicals, like the polychlorinated biphenyls or flame retardants, which are used by consumers, or personal care products used by consumers leaking into the atmosphere. And we are talking about pesticides, which have been brought into the environment by intention, right, in agriculture. This is one example of a pesticide, DDT, which I referred to earlier. You see here the distribution over the compartments globally. And you see that the soil is most prominent, the ocean is second prominent, and here DDE, this would be then the main conversion product of this insecticide, and that is also a persistent substance, and that is always found nowadays wherever DDT had been cycling. Okay, an important measure of this air surface exchange is the fugacity of the substance from the compartment, from air or from the soil or from the surface water. And fugacity is describing the escaping tendency from a phase, and for seawater, you could derive it from the concentration in the water and from the Henry coefficient. Note that this Henry coefficient is inversely proportional to the one which is most commonly used in the atmospheric sciences. This is the one in units of moles per liter and the atmosphere, while this one here is in units of pascals cubic meter per the mole. And the leading question would be whether the fugacity from water is stronger than the fugacity from air. And that would then indicate the direction of the flux between the two compartments. And this flux will always be non-zero whenever there is relaxation to chemical equilibrium happening. Relaxation to chemical equilibrium will always happen when some disturbance takes place, like, for instance, a concentration pulse into, say, the water by a spill. Then a concentration equilibrium would be disturbed, or there is an emission into the air, or there is a drop in the air concentration, for instance, because of a ban of the substance. So the concentration would very slowly decline, and this change of the equilibrium would also trigger a relaxation and a flux back from the ocean into the air. For soil, this is the equation one can apply for soil. It's also the Henry coefficient plays a role here, as well as the organic matter in the soil. The reason for that is we are talking about lipophilic substances here, and whenever an organic phase is present, then the affinity is high. That is also what is behind bioaccumulation and biomagnification along food chains. I show you here an old example of a study where the fugacity between air and seawater indicated for the first time that an insecticide which had been applied decades before was returned to the atmosphere. So imagine, of course, introducing an insecticide into the pristine marine environment, of course, happens via atmospheric deposition, right? Once the chemical equilibrium is established, no flux would happen, but if the substance concentration in air is declining, then the return flux in relaxation to equilibrium from the sea surface water is expected. And that is here the historical first example, first study which showed that, namely in northern waters, in the Bering Sea and in the Chukchi Sea, which is close to Alaska and Kamchatka, right? The fugacity over water exceeded the fugacity over air in a measurement in 1993, while in 1988 this had not been the case. So here we historically witness the return of a pesticide from the ocean into the atmosphere. So let me now come to the study which I selected to talk about today. We had a number of studies addressing air-sea exchange as well as addressing air-soil exchange, and I am now talking about a study in India in 2014. This is a cooperation of 3 institutes: the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry in Mainz, the Masaryk University with a extraordinarily good trace substance laboratory in Brno, Czech Republic, and the IIT in Chennai in India. Probably I do not need to introduce the summer monsoon, but nevertheless I would like to stress that it actually means that southern hemispheric air is reaching southern India, because the ITCZ is moving northward and southern hemispheric air is arriving on the subcontinent. That happens usually in June, and we studied it in June 2014 by here illustrated by back trajectories in various heights. The experimental methods we applied are listed here. So we sampled air, we sampled soil. In air, we sampled the gas phase and the particulate phase that is always necessary if you are dealing with semi-volatile substances and those which are air surface exchanging, those are semi-volatile substances. We sampled soil, only the topsoil, and that was then cleaned up and analyzed with various chromatographic methods. A number of parameters in air were running over a few months in order to characterize the aerosol physically. The arrival of the monsoon, as I mentioned, we tracked by looking into the back trajectories at various heights, so from the ground to a few thousand meters. And we saw that pre-monsoon air was replaced by monsoon air through a period of mixed air arrival. And actually the monsoon air mostly first arrived in the mid troposphere and then reached also the boundary layer. That happens every year like this, I understand. Here is a time series of pollutants which we addressed. Here are the insecticides, here are industrial chemicals, ECOC, and under monsoon conditions, these concentrations were lower than under pre-monsoon conditions. And of course, that had a lot to do with the washout, which reduces pre-monsoon levels to monsoon levels. I have here just exemplarily the deposition flux quantified, and the blue bar standing for the monsoon period and this greenish bar for the pre-monsoon period. So it's a logarithmic units here. So under monsoon, the wet deposition from air to soil, of course, is much higher. The drop was a factor of 4 to 20 for these individual substance groups. Now let's look into the soil. We sampled soil from 3 land use categories in southern India in this Western Ghats site, namely tea gardens. This is actually, these are historically the oldest tea gardens of India, by the way. Then in the shrub and in the forest. And these are the concentrations of some of the pollutants in the soil samples. And you see that some say notorious industrial, this is a flame retardant, these are the insecticides, and these are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are still emitted to a high fluxes into the atmosphere because they are byproducts of all kinds of combustion, like road traffic, like fossil fuel burning from point sources, and so on. All these substances have been deposited into this background soil in the Western Ghats of southern India. Partly because of long-range transport, we can assume this applies certainly for the polychlorinated biphenyls and for these flame retardants. But in the case of the DDT, it was certainly because we find it in the tea garden soil and not in the other 2 soils. This was certainly due to direct application, although it was not recorded there, but we assume that there was some direct application must have been in the past. Now, what is the chemical equilibrium doing between air and soil when monsoon arrives in the Western Ghats? This is compiled into this picture here. You see again, as in the previous slide, you see here again the comparison of the fugacity from the soil over the air. That means numbers exceeding 1 denote upward flux of the pollutant from the soil, while numbers below 1 denote downward fluxes from the atmosphere to the soil. And the grayish zone indicates that we are not safe in our conclusion close to 1. So only values above 3 and below 0.3 we would consider significant for indicating the direction of the flux. Now for the 3 color-coded land use categories, I have indicated here the change of the fugacity ratio. Means the arrow starts in the pre-monsoon and ends in the monsoon. Means for this red arrow here in the over the tea garden, that the fugacity ratio, which was not significantly deviating from 1, was changed into a fugacity ratio indicating upward flux from the soil. And you see all of these arrows are upward. There is not a single arrow here in none of the 3 land use categories with a downward, which looks downward, which would indicate that the tendency to leave the soil was weaker under monsoon than under pre-monsoon. This has to do, of course, with the drop of the concentration in the air. And we diagnose here that the DDT was kind of drawn out from the soil of the tea garden under monsoon, while in the other soils, the DDT had a higher tendency to leave, but still did not volatilize the soil. For the PCBs, we see a tendency to leave the soils under monsoon, which is not there under pre-monsoon. Same for the hexachlorocyclohexane. Okay, so let's shortly summarize the experimental result. This is a concentration drop occurs in the atmosphere, and the direction of the vertical flux of a number of organochlorine pesticides and polychlorinated biphenyls may change with onset of the monsoon. Now we want to study the leading hypothesis, whether this seasonal fluctuation is eventually determined by large-scale advection. What we see is there is a drop, and then because of the revolatilization, there is a compensational increase of the concentration in air, shown in red here. And as the monsoon is propagating northward across the subcontinent, might be an increasing contribution from the soil, which is more and more compensating for the washout drop, right? So volatilization from the ground is happening, and this is strongest probably in the south, where this drop was highest, and then when monsoon is propagating successively towards north, and then this volatilization tendency might decrease. This we studied with a 3-dimensional model, three-dimensional in air, coupled to a soil model, two-dimensional in soil. So only the topsoil is there. And you see here distributions during pre-monsoon in the air for 4 gray substances, which are air soil cycling, namely 2 hexachlorocyclohexanes. These are 2 isomers. This one is the one which had been observed to be volatilized in these northern seas in the study I showed you before, because it had been used much earlier in agriculture than this one. This is a more modern, say, pesticide. And these are 2 industrial chemicals. So here I compare the concentration change we observe in the atmosphere, relative concentration change in percent. So for instance, alpha HCH dropped by 83% when the monsoon arrived, with the predicted concentration change in this model. Now, when the time goes by, these changes of the concentration fields are predicted. So start of monsoon is around 1 of June, and then 1 week later there is a decline indicated by the model, a decline which is triggered by the advection of the clean air from the south end of the domain, and that is more pronounced a few weeks later when this clean air has advanced more over the continent. What does this mean for the long-term cycling of these substances? We are talking about substances which have been in use since the 1950s or even earlier. And we want to understand how monsoon is actually changing this this cycling of the substance. So to this end, we constructed a one-dimensional model, namely a series of boxes. Each box is representing 1 latitudinal zone in southern Asia. And each box consists of 2 compartments, the topsoil and the boundary layer. And the fluxes between as well as into and out of this box are modeled with ordinary differential equations, and with the help of global model output, global climate data, and so on. Now the monsoon is kind of sweeping during 40 years, 40 times across these series of 7 boxes. And let's have a look into the time series the model is predicting for one of these boxes, the southernmost where our measurement took place. What we see in predicted for air and for soil is different for different substances because of their different emission patterns, which of course goes into the model here. The emission pattern of the two PCBs are historically very similar. The emission pattern of the alpha HCH is characterized by this ban, which was effective for India around 1990. The concentration in soil obviously follows this concentration in air. And what is the flux doing? This is now the air-soil exchange flux upward for HCH from the beginning even. So say after a few years, the flux was clearly upward from the beginning, while for the PCB 153, and that has to do with the affinity of this substance to the organic matter in the soil being stronger than of this congener of the PCB. For this substance, first the flow was downward, and then in later years it was upward in response to the decline in the atmosphere. The same, but now showing the geographic distribution of these tendencies, looking into 3 boxes at the same time. Blue is the northernmost here. You see the concentration in the south is somewhat higher than in the north, and but what is happening is rather similar. The flux, which is corresponding to this concentration changes in air and soil, though was not very similar in the different latitudinal regions of the subcontinent. You see here that this this increase of the volatilization from the soil, which occurred in southern India, is not reflected by the same in central and northern India. Here we look into the behavior of the pesticide DDT, which was banned in India never. It was only banned in agriculture, and that is shown here, the decline. And what is residually still applied today is in health programs to fight vectors of the malaria, as you know. So there is a strong decline, and in response to this decline, there is also an air-soil exchange flux. And you see here the major conversion product of the DDT in the soil, which is DDE. This is also a persistent substance, as I said before, and you see that the decline of DDE, if at all apparent, is much less pronounced than the decline of the parent product. For the flux, it's also very different. So fluxes exceeding 0 means upward fluxes for DDT are not indicated by the model, while for DDE, there is from the beginning, there is upward flux. So DDE formed in the soil is emitted into the atmosphere. That is that we would have anyway predicted even without modeling it physicochemically, because there is no direct emission of DDE into the air. There is only emission of DDT into the air. So the concentration will always be from the gradient will always be from the source soil into the air. Also for 3 latitudinal bands, same. Also here there are not much differences in the concentrations, but again there are big differences in the flux which is responding to these concentration changes. Okay, I approach the end of this study and into the air surface exchange of long-lived pollutants in southern India as related to the influence of the monsoon. And the main results are those as follows here. These insecticides and the industrial chemical polychlorinated biphenyls are revolatilizing from soil at a background site. The pollution drop in air, which is coming with the arriving monsoon, enhances the revolatilization of these persistent pollutants. For some of them, it is not enough for volatilization, but the tendency to volatilize is enhanced anyway. The monsoon remobilizes a small fraction of chemicals deposited and stored in soil. That means what has been deposited in the previous year, a small part of it will be drawn out by the monsoon of the following year. Monsoon air which arrives in northern India is expected to be less clean than in southern India for basically 2 reasons. One is there is pollution ongoing of some of these substances, which adds to the clean air. But there is another non-trivial and here studied and detected reason too, namely the mobilization of the pollution which is stored in the soils, which is kind of drawn out by the monsoon air. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions. And but let me also thank all my cooperators, of course. And I have listed here the names who contributed on site with many measurements, also by sampling on site, which contributed by analysis in the laboratory. And those colleagues, Céline de Gradel and Jing Wu, primarily who contributed to the modeling. And yes, with this, I give back to, I think, Pallavi, right?
Yeah, I'll take it first and then I'll hand over to Pallavi. Thank you, Gerhard, for a very interesting talk. I don't see any questions in the chat box. Maybe the participants, I put a message there. The participants, if you have any questions, you can post it in the chat box. Unfortunately, you can't ask. You know, the voice is turned down for the participants. So I saw a hand raised by a participant, Monalin Mishra. You can type the question here. In the meantime, while you post the questions, I have a question, Gerhard. So I was just wondering that, thank you very much. I know most of these studies, and I know the substances that you have been working on modeling and measurements. At the same time, did you ever think about endosulfan, considering measurement of endosulfan or doing the modeling? because it was used. Yeah, you know that it was used widely used everywhere, and in Kerala especially it was used until 2014, and there was a ban from Supreme Court to stop, because there has been a lot of victims of endosulfan usage, used in cashew, cotton, tea, all estates in the northern part of Kerala.
Yeah, we are very much interested in endosulfan, but unfortunately we were not able to get hold of application data, so we do not know how much endosulfan was applied. We tried to put this together, this data for India and for many other major agricultural countries, and it was not successful. So the estimates which are existing for emissions into the earth system of this insecticide, which, by the way, for the auditory, endosulfan is the major substitute for the DDT historically, and which has then banned 40 years later, namely in 2013. We cannot model it. We measured it. We found it not in the soil because our sensitivity was not high enough by that time. We only found the product, a conversion product of endosulfan, which is its sulfate. But we found it at many other sites on land and in the ocean. Yes, we are very interested. We continue fighting to understand the global cycling of endosulfan.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Gerhard. There are a few questions in the chat box now. I'll read it for you. There is one question from Sonia Yadav. She is asking, thank you, very nice session it is, great work. The question is, how long the HCH, DDT and PCB will last and affect the health of people in India? Has there been the exposure study and future scenarios?
Yeah, it is not only in India. Thank you for the question. It is worldwide. And we cannot give we cannot model it into the future because the persistence of these substances is not correctly known. So we have only estimates of the degradation rates. For some of the compartments, we know them rather well. For other compartments, we don't know them well. For instance, the DDT degradation rate in ocean is probably very, very close to zero. But it matters, of course, whether it is really zero or whether it has a non-zero value close to zero, because for the total cycling, it will always matter the rates in each of the compartments. So so we cannot really predict it, but from populations which have been studied by toxicological methods, mostly in the Arctic, and have been studied over the last decades, and there are assessment reports every few years coming out, which are tracking these. From these studies, we do know that the concentrations in the body burdens are declining, though much slower than in the environmental compartments. And the halving times are known for many populations. The halving times as a decline in human milk, decline in blood tissue, in blood and in tissues.
Thank you. That was actually a question from Vanessa. I read it wrong. Then there is another question from Shukla Acharji. He is asking, here in northeastern region of India, pesticides used in the tea garden is polluting the soil. How long it takes to rejuvenate the soil nutrient if pesticides utilization is stopped?
How long does it take to what?
Rejuvenate the soil nutrients.
To rejuvenate the soil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are no there is no knowledge actually for these old pesticides to tell that the soil is actually only cleaning in case of volatilization or degradation, or if the like the tea plant, if the vegetation is uptaking from the soil, and that is not the case for these organic chlorine pesticides to a significant extent, while for more modern pesticides, which are usually more polar, less lipophilic, more polar, then you get higher uptake rates from the soil. But for these old first generation chemicals and pesticides, I think there is no expectancy that the soil will be cleaned by the plants.
Okay, thank you.
And the degradation rate in soil, which is maybe more important than the vegetation cover and the uptake into the vegetation. Yeah, this is unfortunately also not known to certainty, which we could use for running such a scenario. So yeah, unfortunately, I cannot tell. Yeah.
Thanks, Gerhard. Another question from Saurabh Sonwani. He is a representative of iLEAPS, Early Career Research Network from Southeast Asia, actually. And his question is, as you have mentioned that wet scavenging of POPs from atmosphere, so his question, what kind of POPs are effectively scavenged from the atmosphere? And which one is less efficiently removed through wet deposition?
Yeah, there is a number of things for this question. Of course, monsoon and precipitation in general is important to consider when it is about cycling of these pollutants. There are several processes which are needed to look into. First is the substance in the gas phase or is it in the particulate phase? Particles are much more efficient washed out by rains than the gas phase is, and most substances I have been talking about here are mostly in the gas phase. Also DDT and the higher PCBs, they are partly in the particulate phase, but they are mostly in the gas phase. So the efficiency of washout is, considering this criterion, is low. Then how about the water solubility or Henry coefficient? Well, because you can imagine a polar substance with a high Henry coefficient in units of the most commonly used one in atmospheric sciences, the one in moles per liter per atmosphere of pressure units. This one would be washed out much more efficiently. Again, the tendency is to be washed out efficiently is very low for these substances here, because their water solubility is extremely low. The water solubility of DDT is so low. In contrast, these substances are lipophilic. They have a tendency to accumulate in fat rather than in water, right? So washout efficiencies are low for most of these substances, and they are dominated by the particulate mass fraction.
Yeah, he has an associated question. If there is a significant difference in wet scavenging of different POPs from atmosphere, then why?
Yeah, it is. It is a particulate mass fraction which is most relevant here. Yeah. So, for instance, the PBDEs, which I mentioned, these are flame retardants, say of the first generation. They have been banned in the 1990s and 2000s. They are almost not emitted anymore nowhere. The PBDEs, which are still cycling around us, they are rather well washed out because of their, at least for the higher congeners with more bromine atoms, their high particulate mass fraction.
Okay, thank you. There is another question from Armando Pelliccioni. Thank you Professor, for your interesting presentation. Do you think that analysis of fluctuations can be applied in suburban areas as in Italy?
Significant fluctuations I would not expect. Insignificant fluctuations you can always expect with changes in the concentrations of something which is still emitted or which is cycling, is influenced, for instance, by the daily patterns of temperature. There are always insignificant flux changes, but strong flux changes we expect only where we have a strong pulse of emission or a strong drop of concentration. Like in this case here, the arrival of very clean southern hemispheric air. This is a drop from clean into very, very clean. But in Italy, I cannot think of any such comparable signal in the meteorology. No.
Yeah. Next question is from Stefan Roth. He is asking, any study have you been carried out on geosmin behavior upon arrival of monsoon?
Say it again, please. On geosmin?
Yeah, geosmin behavior upon arrival of monsoon.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I understand what geosmin is about.
I have no idea. If Tufan, if you can talk, I unmuted you. You can ask. You can explain what you meant by that question. I can't. Okay, maybe we can come back to that later. So we'll go to the next question from Sagado Paira. He is asking, I understood that after onset of monsoon, the POP decreases due to washout, but again it revolatilization after passing rain phase. Then how monsoon over North India is expected to be less clean because the effect of POP is already dropped down in active monsoon?
The concentration drop has two reasons. One is northern hemispheric air is replaced by very clean southern hemispheric air. The second reason is there is some washout, which is not very effective for some of the most say critically most concerning substances, because of the reason I explained in response to the previous question. So there is a concentration drop, which is which has these two reasons, and it is compensated for by emissions from the soil, from what had been deposited to the soil, say the year before or so, by the process we have studied, namely the clean air itself is triggering the volatilization from these burdens stored in the soil, and that compensates for the concentration drop. So the concentration drop, the effective one, the net concentration drop is smaller in northern India than in southern India.
Thank you. So Tufan has replied about what is geosmin. His question is, any study been carried out on geosmin behavior upon arrival of monsoon, which means when the first rain drops on earth, a chemical secreted by bacteria, that is the geosmin, is a metabolite of various actinomycetes and fungi. That is geosmin. So if you have carried out any work on that.
I understand it is about metabolization of chemicals by bacteria or other microbiology. Yeah, we are dealing here with substances which are not degradable by enzymatic processes, or they are degradable, but then very, very slowly. So it does not matter on the time scale of days or weeks. Biodegradation has characteristic times of many weeks to years for these substances. I'm talking about the chlorinated pesticides, I'm talking about the chlorinated industrial chemicals, brominated industrial chemicals. This is different for example, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which have biodegradation half-lives on the order of a few weeks to many weeks. And also endosulfan, mentioned by Semina earlier, endosulfan, the substitute for DDT, that is also a substance which is rather fastly degrading in soil. Actually, historically, this was the justification to have it as a substitute for DDT, because instead of residence times in soils of many months, one would have residence times of only a few weeks. But still, it's still a few weeks. It's not something which is happening on the first days of the monsoon.
Thank you. There are no more questions. So thanks. Thank you very much, Gerhard. I'll hand over to Pallavi to conclude the session. So I'm changing.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Professor Lammel, for such a nice and great insights about the southwest monsoon in India and what are the impacts on the organochlorine and organophosphate pesticides. So let me summarize about some of the points the lecture talks about the global distribution and atmospheric transport of chlorinated hydrocarbons. And he also described about the cycling of chemical species in the environment, the modeling, transport, and air-soil exchange of the pollutants during monsoon and pre-monsoon season in India. Then talks about the emission pattern of such pollutants. He also explains about the methodology for collection and determination of VOCs and PEHs, PCBs used, and the deposition flux of different PHs in pre-monsoon and monsoon season. So, and also mentioned about the persistent pollutants and the chemical equilibrium between air and soil during monsoon season in different land use categories. So before I officially close the session, on behalf of the organizing committee, iLEAPS, very grateful to you, Professor Lammel, for taking your time out for this beautiful session, for this beautiful for your beautiful talk, and for delivering the very nice insights about the pesticides in and the southwest monsoon interaction in India. I also like to thanks to all the attendees who took active participation in this session and detailed discussion, which makes the session more interactive. And last but not the least, iLEAPS, UKCEH, iLEAPS IPO, Samina for their help and support in successful completion of this event. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pallavi, and thank you very much, Semina. I really enjoyed to be guest in your seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Yeah, thank you all. So we are running this seminar every month. So please keep an eye on Twitter, LinkedIn, all social media will be advertising, and you might also get a mail on your mailbox. Thank you very much. I'm ending this session. Have a great day to everyone. Bye.